Good morning, everyone. Welcome to New Center Maine's Political Brew. Glad you could be with us on this Memorial Day weekend. Before Phil and John get out to fire up the barbecue, we're going to talk a little bit of politics and heat things up that way. Gentlemen, good morning.
Good morning.
Let's begin with the process of reopening the state, as you've had some groups protesting out in front of the Blaine House and the State House and filing lawsuits demanding everything reopen. You had about 80 small businesses, largely from the southernmost counties, suggesting that they should slow down the reopening. They say that it puts by lifting the quarantine for out-of-state visitors, puts their employees at risk. John, it seems to me this pretty well illustrates the dilemma faced by Governor Mills as she tries to decide how to manage this.
Yeah, I mean, on the right, she has people that say open up the economy completely. On the left, she has people that say go ahead and continue the 14-day quarantine, which, as we all know, is unenforceable. It's a great idea, but it's not going to be enforceable. And ultimately, I think the governor's taking the right tack. She's walking right down the middle, following the science, and she's also starting to do more of relying on businesses to act socially responsible, and I think they are.
Bill?
Well, I think the distinction I would make, Pat, is that this should be a matter of choice rather than an executive order that shuts down every business. We're going to see in the next several weeks how many of these businesses are actually going to be able to survive what has been forced upon them. My view is that whether you live in New Hampshire or New Mexico, people have gotten the word that you need to keep your distance, wear a mask if you're not feeling well, wash your hands. It shouldn't be some arbitrary border that causes businesses to remain closed. And as I said at the onset, it should be a matter of choice at this point, not by executive order.
The economic impact of this is still unfolding, but we already know some of the effects. For example, the unemployment rate hit 11%, and that doesn't even fully recognize the number of job losses among people who are still being paid under the PPP program. The state only collected about half of the revenue it expected last month. Sales are down in most sectors, of course, but a big factor is moving the income tax deadline to July 15th into the next fiscal year. Phil, what should the administration and the legislature be doing about this right now?
Well, as we've talked about on the Political Brew, I feel this should have been one of the priorities that the governor focused on a month ago. It was very clear from the onset that revenues, whether they're sales taxes or income taxes, are falling off the cliff. And it's time for the legislative leaders and the Appropriations Committee and the Governor's Office of Finance to sit down and make hard decisions about where to curtail or eliminate spending, because I don't think there's much appetite by Maine citizens to see their taxes go up.
John?
I think it's time for the legislature to really seriously think about coming back in session. I think they are projected to have a $3 billion deficit. It's probably going to be more, a little bit over $1 billion. That's manageable, but you cannot do that alone. You need the legislature, both Democrats and Republicans, coming in. It's going to be tough. It's going to be during the summer, early fall, and where they're not used to coming in during that time frame. But they're going to have to come in, and they're going to have to do the people's business and figure out a way that makes these cuts, but does so that is at least hurtful, if you will, to the average Mainer.
Maine and every other state is looking for more help from the federal government. Senator Angus King, for one, is angry with Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell over the lack of action on any new COVID-19 financial relief for the states. King says Maine is facing drastic cuts at the state and local level if more federal help is not forthcoming. And he says McConnell refuses to even hold negotiations on the proposals that have been put forward. And he points out the Senate has been back in Washington for 3 weeks, not a single vote taken on a COVID-19 related matter. John, is this a legitimate gripe from Senator King?
I mean, it certainly is. I mean, really, let's face it. Mitch McConnell is not the Senate Majority Leader. Donald Trump is. And he's waiting for his orders from Donald Trump, who has thrown a tantrum because he has said that their House bill is dead on arrival. The facts is that you have basically 36 million Americans that have filed for unemployment, and something needs to be done. All of a sudden, Mitch McConnell has suggested he's a fiscal conservative. Well, he wasn't one when he was giving out and bailing out businesses and millionaires and billionaires with tax breaks. He now needs to step up and do it for the American people.
And Phil, no one really wants politics as usual at any time, but especially now. Why not at least have negotiations? Show people that you have good faith that I don't like that bill, but what can we work out?
Yeah, I think Senator King has a valid point. He rightly is frustrated with the Senate leadership. There is nothing but good things that can come out of hearings and discussions on how and what is the most effective way to assist municipalities and cities and the states in general. I'm a little concerned that if we just start spraying money out of Washington across all of the states, Mainers are going to end up paying for some of the perhaps not as, how shall I say, professional management in other states as we have been able to do here in the state of Maine. I don't want to pay for, name the city in the United States for their mismanagement.
49 of 50 governors in this country have higher approval ratings for handling the pandemic than President Trump does. He's at 43%. For her part, Governor Mills is at 66% in this Washington Post Survey Monkey poll. Phil, what do you take from this?
Well, I think early on, the president was getting very high support and accolades for the way he was handling. I think he overexposed himself. He became too impulsive in his thoughts and comments, and it's being reflected in these surveys that you're mentioning. And I think it only goes to prove that the governors are closer to the people in their states. They have been, I think you can say, very effective at communicating what they're doing and why and what to expect. And I'm not surprised by this survey.
John, what do you think?
I think American people generally want to rally around their leader. And so he had approval ratings that were very high in the beginning. But when people saw that he was indecisive, that he was not assisting the states, that he was actually working against his own experts, they began to have doubts in his ability to lead. On the other hand, why the governors are so popular is because they were decisive. They took action. They asked people in their states to social distance and quarantine and do the things. And the results are there for all of us to see. Instead of blaming somebody else for the problem, the governors accepted the responsibility and have done something about it.
This past week, Senator Angus King held a telephone town hall with constituents, and he said people of Maine have put their faith in me to represent their voice in Washington. To do that, it's critical that I listen to their concerns and share my own thinking. John, do you think it would behoove Senator Susan Collins to do something similar? That's been a real bone of contention with a lot of her opponents in particular.
Yes, I think she should. I think she should hold these meetings. I know her concerns have been that some few people will dominate the outcome and that not everybody will be heard, but there are ways to address that issue. And I think by not doing this, it makes it look like she's tied to corporate interest as opposed to the Maine people, and that she's out of touch with what Maine people want to say to her. And that, she looks too regal. She looks too imperial by not wanting to meet with the rank and file of, the state of Maine. She needs to step out and hear from the people, even if it might be messy, even if it might be ugly.
Bill, what do you think? Senator Collins says, I listen to my constituents in other ways, but these town hall meetings represent something that's necessary.
Yeah, there was a day, Pat, when an elected official could hold a town hall meeting and the constituents would show up and it would be a relatively informative give and take. Today, they become opportunities for ambush. I recall when Governor LePage was in office and he came to my hometown for a town capital for a day, if you will, and the room got filled with people who weren't residents of my town, and they were there to make political hay out of the governor's leadership style. And I think it's unfair to the constituents and to the senator to create an environment where people can come in and just play gotcha. My own experience is that Senator Collins is very approachable, responsive. I don't think this is the issue that John thinks it is.
President Trump keeps expressing reservations about the idea of voting by mail, which many people think is going to be necessary by November because of the epidemic. And he claims it'll lead to fraud. However, efforts during his administration to prove voter fraud have come to nothing. What's he really worried about here, Phil? What do you think?
Well, let me just say it's a little disingenuous because I believe President Trump voted by mail as a Florida resident. So that kind of doesn't wash. I think most Americans want to make sure that people who are voting are legally citizens and eligible to vote. And they want to make sure that whoever casts the ballot is, one person, one vote, not a vote filled out by a family member or an advocate.
John, what do you think?
Well, I think that the president protests too much. I do. I think that when they put the voter commission together, and our own Secretary of State Matt Dunlap was on it, they found no real voter fraud, and so as a result, he disbanded that commission without trying to have a report rendered. What I think they're trying to do is they don't want a lot of people to vote. If people vote in key states and they get out and vote, the polls are showing that Joe Biden is up by 10 or 11% in these key states, and I think they're trying to go ahead and limit the amount of people that will come to the polls. It's easier to be in your kitchen voting than it is if you have to go out on a rainy or snowy day. That's what I really
All right,
think.
let's finish up with winners and losers in politics this week. Phil, we'll start with you.
Oh, thank you, Pat. The loser this week is the state police allegedly have been improperly surveilling people. That is clearly, a violation of our rights, and they are my loser of the week, especially if, in fact, this is accurate. The winner of the week is the people we are remembering today on Memorial Day weekend. They are the winners because they've influenced who we are and who we are becoming.
All right, John.
Yeah, the loser of the week is Donald Trump for not having the unveiling of President Obama's portrait at the White House, not wanting to be a part of it. And I think the winner of the week, as you said, Phil, in a rare moment of bipartisanship, it is my father, a Korean War veteran, my grandfather, a World War I veteran, all the main veterans who have served this country and who are such patriots. My hat is off to you.
A salute to all of them. Gentlemen, thanks so much. Thanks for being with us. Thank you for joining us as well. We'll see you next time. News Center Maine is back after this.